It's your boy JJ Domination, and today we are going to be talking about the Madden 21 teams that you should be trying to do a realistic rebuild with. So, obviously, this is all Madden 20. These are just some downloadable rosters of the kind of like what the rosters look like today with all the draft picks and stuff. The ratings don't mean anything. Just some dude made the class. Shout out to him. You know, that's all this is. It's just a visual of what we're going to be going over today. And the first team we're going to be talking about is the Chicago Bears. I had a list of 12 teams written down, but I narrowed it down to 8, and this is one of the 8 that made the cut, so this is who we're going to be talking about today. All 8 teams have something similar in common, and that's basically like it's all up to the user, number one, to put the team in the direction they think is necessary, and built-in storylines. You know, it's all basically the same. And I kind of stayed away from some of your obvious choices, like the Carolina Panthers, Jacksonville Jaguars, New York Jets, even the Las Vegas Raiders, who might be better than a team considered rebuilding, but you know what I mean. I tried to stay away from some of the obvious ones. There are a few obvious ones in here, but I didn't want to put them all in here. Anyway, let's just get started, man. First of all, overall roster breakdown. A lot of the best players on this team play on offense, except for Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson, who's a wide receiver, in the final year of his contract out of Penn State. Let's go ahead and go position by position. We have the quarterbacks right here, Mitchell Trubisky and Nick Foles. This team obviously traded for Nick Foles from Jacksonville, coming over now to Chicago to play in this offense. And then, let's see, my bad. Looking down at my phone. My bad. Alright, so you have Trubisky, Foles, Tyler Bray, kind of a, practice squad. He's just kind of there, you know what I'm saying? But Trubisky, his fifth-year option was declined. In terms of a Madden quarterback, he isn't too bad. Like, he has 84 speed. Like, he's a good athlete. The throwing stats aren't as bad as you would think for a guy like Trubisky, who isn't all that good in real life. So, like, it's workable in Madden terms. But this is a team where either you try to make it work with Trubisky, whose fifth-year option was declined, you try to make it work with Foles, or you look to get your future quarterback. Maybe it's Trevor Lawrence, maybe it's Justin Fields, Trey Lance, Jamie Newman, or you just download a regular old Madden class and it's the guy who you have scouted who ends up being good, or maybe he isn't as good and you just want to develop him and take the slow burn approach. You know, there's a lot of different avenues you could go with for the quarterback position. I don't think it's really that complicated. Running back, you got Tariq Cohen and David Montgomery. Ryan Nall, kind of a fullback running back hybrid. He's more of a special team, practice squad type of guy. And then you got Cordell Patterson, who plays some running back at times. He's even bulked up to play a little bit of running back. But Tariq Cohen, kind of the Darren Sproles in this offense, the smaller, shiftier running back who can just do a lot of different things. David Montgomery, more of the power bruiser back who is pretty good in his own right. And then Cordell Patterson, of course, a versatile chess piece. Kind of, when the Vikings drafted him, I feel like they drafted him with the intention that he would kind of be like a Percy Harvin-like player, where he's versatile, can do a lot of different things. And even though later on in his career he's shown that he can do that, early on when the Vikings needed him to, he was more of a kick returner than like a wide receiver running back hybrid. So this running back room is interesting. I think this team needs to have a little bit more depth in the running back room. That's not going to be hard to do. You can literally sign him in free agency right now, just off the street. Fullback, they have J.P. Holtz listed. I think the dude that made these rosters just put a tight end at fullback for like every team. J.P. Holtz is more of a tight end than a fullback in terms of how this team uses them. At wide receiver, this wide receiver room could look very different in a year or two when it comes to real life and on Madden. So Allen Robinson, clear-cut number one receiver on this team, but he is in a contract year. He played for the Jaguars, now playing for the Bears. He's played with bad quarterbacks his entire career. He could decide to leave, and he could decide to go to a different team with a better quarterback, or he could just hang around here, get a bag, and hope that everything fixes itself out. or sorts itself out. You have Anthony Miller, who's a fine player, you know, a little hyped coming out of Memphis. I think he was like a third rounder. Really good wide receiver prospect for a guy selected on day 2. But he's just kind of been okay. He hasn't really shown as much as you would like to see out of Anthony Miller. And then you got Ted Ginn, who's just a veteran. I would call him a reliable set of hands, but he has a lot of drops. That's just kind of who Ted Ginn is. That's kind of what he's been. Of course, we talked about Cordell Patterson. He can give you a lot as a wide receiver, running back hybrid. And then you got 3 young receivers right here. Riley Ridley, Javon Wims, and Darnell Mooney. Mooney was a rookie that this team drafted this year in real life. Javon Wims, they took in the 7th round, I believe like 2 years ago now. And Riley Ridley, coming off his rookie year, was a 4th rounder. Pretty solid for the Bears when he played. Maybe you develop one of these guys to be your future like number 2 or number 3 wide receiver. But for now, they're going to be decent, high 60 overall players. Or maybe if Madden reworks its overall system, maybe they're lower than that. But, you know, for now, like, this is a good wide receiver room to start out with. You got 7 guys in here. I imagine all 7 will make the roster, you know, in year 1. So it's, you know, don't overthink it, really. At tight end, the room is pretty stacked. You know, you have Jimmy Graham. I wouldn't say stacked, but there's a lot of depth in this tight end room. You have Jimmy Graham, who, he's whatever at this point. He's kind of washed up. He was decent for the Packers in points of the year last year, but he's, you know, pretty much washed up at this point. He's on a 2-year deal with a no-trade clause, so have fun eating that for a couple years. And then this team drafted Cole Kmet in the 2nd round out of Notre Dame. Good tight end prospect. We'll see how he develops in your franchise. Demetrius Harris, he's been with the Kansas City Chiefs and the Cleveland Browns. He's been decent everywhere he's been. Just a nice 6'7" vertical jump ball type of receiver, receiving tight end that you like to have in the red zone. That's just kind of his game. You have Adam Shaheen out of Ashland, kind of a small school tight end who a lot of people had some hype for and some promise for. He was a former 2nd round pick. Hasn't really lived up to anything yet. Kind of disappointing for the Bears' sake. And then you have their long snapper Patrick Scales, aka the 42 overall tight end, because Madden has yet to add an official long snapper position. What's funny is if you go to the depth chart, you can actually put him as your long snapper, but because he's listed as a tight end on the actual roster and they don't have a long snapper position, you know, he's just a 42 overall tight end. They're basically useless in your franchise mode, so there's like no reason to keep him. And then you look at the offensive line. You have Charles Leno here as your left tackle, 27, I think, going on 28. These rosters, again, some of the ages are going to be inaccurate because they had to add the rookies on here. So he's basically a tackle that might stick around for the short term. Maybe long term, like year 3, you have to start thinking about getting some more tackle depth. At left guard, you have James Daniels, who comes with some center guard flexibility. He was a center at Iowa. And he's been a pretty solid guard in the NFL for a younger player. Then you look at Cody White here. Again, same deal. He has center guard flexibility. Pretty good as well. You don't have to worry about that center position for at least a couple years. And then you have this big hole at right guard. You have Jermaine Ifedi, who is a former tackle, translating over to guard or kicking inside the guard to see how he plays. A former tackle, really wasn't that good with Seattle. Then you have Rashad Coward, who saw some playing time last year at guard when Kyle Long went down with an injury. And then you have Arlington Hambright, who I think was a draft pick last year from this team, if I remember correctly. But, you know, looking at this team right here and looking at right guard, it's a hole. If Ifedi plays well, then keep him there. But I think this is a position they need to start addressing, is try to get some more guards in here. And then at right tackle, Bobby Massey, he's in his 30s. Jason Spriggs, he's been trash his entire career. I don't really see him resurrecting his career, at least in your franchise mode. So you have to start thinking about getting a new right tackle pretty soon, because the way regression works in Madden, Bobby Massey's going to drop off. And then you got Akeem Hicks, who is starting to enter his 30s as well. Really good player for the Chicago Bears. He's kind of the glue that holds the team together, in my opinion, on the defensive side of the ball. Really good player, but again, you might have to start thinking about the future there as well. It just depends on how regression will hit him. Then you have Brent Urban, who's a fine player, just decent depth to have on the defensive line. Then you go to the right defensive end spot. You got Bilal Nichols and Roy Robertson Harris, two guys that can play, rotate in and out. Bilal Nichols, the guy with more upside out of the two. So, you know, there's that. They're two solid defensive ends. And then you have Eddie Goldman, who I believe is in a contract year as well. So if you don't bring him back, maybe you kick one of these two guys inside the defensive tackle. Maybe it's Bilal Nichols. But you have Eddie Goldman right here from Florida State, not Fresno State, Florida State. He's in the final year of his deal. You have John Jenkins, who's solid depth. Ricky Hatley, more of a practice squad guy, really. And then you have Khalil Mack, the big man on campus, the best player on this team, one of the best players in the NFL. Regardless of how much I troll him for having 7.5 sacks, obviously it's a joke, because it's more than just sack production. It's about pressure, being disruptive, you know, having the game plan against that player. You know, obviously it's more than just 7.5 sacks, but it's more of an inside joke because, like, Zadarius Smith, like, pretty much almost doubled his sack production, or not doubled, but, you know, 13.5 to 7.5, and he had to wait until basically somebody got hurt to get into the Pro Bowl. He was a substitute, which is bullshit. But yeah, Khalil Mack, great player. And then you have like some depth pieces, Devontae Bond and Isaiah Irvin. They're kind of whatever. And then at middle linebacker, potentially your future franchise staple here in the middle, Roquan Smith. Early 20s, I mean, maybe you try to help with his development, maybe get him into the low 90s by the time he's 25. And then you have Danny Trevathan, who this team brought back, I think, on a 3-year deal or a 2-year deal. Kind of interesting. Trevathan's been a guy who has suffered a lot of injuries the last couple of years, but he's a good player when healthy. Then you have some linebacker depth, you know, guys that'll play special teams mainly. And then you get to right outside linebacker. You have Robert Quinn, who's on a 5-year, $70 million deal. Pretty hefty contract for him. Then you have Barkevious Mingo. This team took a flyer on him, a former top 10 pick in his draft. He's been pretty much a bust up to this point, but he continues to float around and find some work. So, you know, probably will be a high-end special teams player, but I could see him potentially getting some reps in the year. Then you have Travis Gibson, who you drafted this year out of Tulsa, and then you have Khalil Mack's brother, who you got as an undrafted free agent. Then we get to the cornerback room. You have Kyle Fuller, who I think will be 28 this year. I know the rosters are a little off in terms of age, but you have Kyle Fuller, who is in his later 20s. He's a fine player. You know, he's a good corner. But he really didn't break out until Khalil Mack got here. He was kind of viewed as a, not necessarily a bust, but like as an underwhelming player for the Bears, and now he's starting to really find himself as a corner. He's a good zone press corner, so that's good that he's starting to find himself over the last couple of years. Then you have Buster Screen and Artie Burns, two guys who were first-round picks, just haven't worked out with their former teams or whatever. So yeah, now they're here, getting a second chance with the Bears. And then this team drafted Jalen Johnson with their second-round pick out of Utah, cornerback. He could potentially fight for some outside cornerback snaps, maybe even be the starter between him and Artie Burns. And even Kevin Tolliver was decent last year when he got to play, 6'2", almost 200 pounds. He was decent last year. I've seen him a few plays trying to guard Devontae Adams, and he did a good job on him, I thought. And even Duke Shelley's kind of decent as like a depth corner, as a slot corner potentially. And then you have a couple of guys right here, Trey Robertson and Kendall Vildor, just a couple of decent depth guys. You know, Trey more of a special teamer. Vildor will probably be a special teamer, even a practice squad guy. And then you get to the safety position right here. You got Eddie Jackson, who more so in 2018 was really good. 2019, he didn't really flash as much. And I think a lot of that had to do with Adrian Amos going to the Packers, leaving the Chicago Bears. I'm not saying Eddie Jackson can't be good on his own, because I think he can. He proved last year like he was still a good player. But, you know, when you have a guy like Amos who's doing all the dirty work and allowing you to get your interceptions, get your fumble recoveries, score some defensive touchdowns, I think when you have a player like that who can do the dirty work and allow you to shine and flash off the TV, I feel like that benefits them more, and they just don't really have that guy here anymore. You have Cedric McManus, who's okay depth as a safety / nickel corner. Like, he's not bad. When he did get to play, he was decent. DeAndre Houston Carson, he's been on this team for a while, just more of a special teamer. And then at strong safety, they did bring in Tashawn Gibson for 1 year, like on a 1 year deal. He's a decent safety these days, not really anything too special. Then you have some good depth. You know, you have Jordan Lucas, Deion Bush, Stephen Denmark from Valdosta State, who I think was an undrafted free agent, or maybe he was drafted very late in the draft. Can't really remember for sure. And then you have your kicker, Eddie Pinheiro, and then Roberto Aguayo, a.k.a. Ramiz Ahmed. And then you got Pat O'Donnell as your punter. But basically, the overview of the Bears goes as follows. You have a lot of great defensive players. Some getting up there in age, some good young pieces for the future. Eddie Jackson, Roquan Smith comes to mind. Even a guy like Bilal Nichols, even though he's a low 70 overall player, he could develop into a mid to high 80s. You have Khalil Mack, you know, who I don't really see falling off for at least a few more years. Yeah, at least 4 years in Madden life, you know. I don't really see him falling off, even with a high 90 overall like that. He'll probably hit, like, high 80s in, like, 5 years in Madden. Like, if you're a superstar player with superstar X Factor, and you're, like, in your mid to late, or if you're in your late 20s, early 30s, it's a little harder for you to fall off compared to a guy that's in their mid to late 30s. So Khalil Mack will be good for a while, but you do have some interesting storylines. Number one, the quarterback room. If Nick Foles is more of a backup to you, then you have to find that future starter, unless you think Trubisky's got it. The wide receiver room, it could be completely different in 2 years. You know, you need to start thinking about your offensive line, more so your tackles, because they're not guaranteed to be there forever. And then on defense, really just maybe some linebacker depth. That's really it. Like, there's not a whole lot of work that needs to be put into the Chicago Bears. They really just need quarterback and wide receiver, like the wide receiver room, to have like more depth and more star power, more so. But again, you have to think about the rest of the NFC. Why would this team be on here? You have to think about the rest of the NFC, especially your division. You have the Packers and the Vikings, who are going to be super competitive. They have the guy that they believe is their quarterback. They have good rosters around them, so they're going to be ultra competitive. A team like Detroit, their roster may not stack up to yours. They may not be superior to your roster, but they have a quarterback, Matthew Stafford. So the Bears are kind of in a weird position in their division to where, yeah, this team is a good team on paper, a really good roster, but because they don't have the quarterback, they're not as competitive as they would like to be. And then you look around the NFC, you have teams like Tampa Bay who are going all in. You have the New Orleans Saints, San Francisco, Seattle, and then you have teams like Arizona, who's kind of flirting in the same purgatory as you, and the Rams, who aren't really that far off. And then you have the Cowboys and the Eagles. So, and even teams like the Falcons, depending on which version of the Falcons you get, you have them as well. So in this conference, the NFC, like, it's tough. And the Bears are kind of in the middle of that pack. And to get over the hump, you're going to have to find your quarterback, and you're going to have to rework the wide receiver room, and maybe look for a new linebacker to put next to Roquan Smith, because Trevathan, with his injury history and his age and how regression is in Madden, he's probably only going to be good for a year, maybe 2 years. So you got to really start thinking about it. When I talk about rebuilds like this, I'm thinking more for the long term, not for a couple years, like 5 to 7 years. I'm thinking for the long term. I mean, by the time Khalil Mack retires type stuff. So the Bears could be a very interesting rebuild. That's why they're on here. And we have 7 more teams to cover. So hopefully you guys enjoy. And hopefully you guys see where I'm coming from with the Chicago Bears as a rebuild candidate for a realistic style rebuild on Madden 21. And yeah, peace out. Hopefully you guys enjoy.